scientific principles of hypertrophy training. I'm going to start off by reading the glossary. Some important words that relate to hypertrophy training, starting off with the first word, hypertrophy training. Hypertrophy training is training which directly causes muscle growth or muscle maintenance in hypocaloric conditions, or trains and improves systems that underlie muscle growth, thus potentiate its later development. The next word is exercise, a movement pattern used to stimulate a muscle or group of muscles, usually denoted with the biomechanical or colloquial name. Examples: deadlifts, overhead barbell triceps extension, etc. The next word we have is repetition. In short, rep. This is the single execution of an exercise from the desired starting point through the terminal range of motion and back to the desired starting point. That's one rep. Going into our next word, 1 RM, 2 RM, 3 RM. 1, 2, 3, etc. That's repetition maximum. The heaviest weight a person can lift for one repetition. That's 1 RM. In short, 2 repetitions, 2 repetition maximum, 3 repetitions, 3 RM, etc. for a given exercise. The next word we have is set. That means it's a collection of semi-continuous repetitions of an exercise, separated by bouts of rest. And then the next word we have is training session. That's dedicated training time, usually consisting of a warm-up and 1 or 2 or more exercises. And then the next word we have is rest time. That's time spent allowing fatigue to dissipate between repetitions, sets, exercises, and training sessions, most commonly used to describe the time spent recovering between sets. The other words is microcycle, mesocycle, accumulation phase, deload phase, accumulation to deload paradigm, block, macrocycle, periodization, autoregulation, volume, load, relative effort, reps in reserve, frequency, maintenance volume, minimum effective volume, maximum adaptive volume, maximum recoverable volume, fatigue, overreaching, mini-cut, muscle gain phase, fat loss phase, weight maintenance phase, resensitization phase. I'm going to start off by reading some of the things that stood out to me in Chapter 1, Specificity, in the scientific principles of hypertrophy training. I highlighted some things that I feel stood out to me. Starting off with this one. Another common mistake is to make a needs analysis, but design training without an understanding of hypertrophy principles. If you've been in the lifting world for a while, you've undoubtedly met someone whose goal is to get big. They want to get big, but who trains near their 1 RM, 1 rep maximum, all the time, unaware that lower weight and higher reps will stimulate growth more effectively. On the other end of the spectrum, you have also probably encountered people trying to get rounder, firmer glutes. They want a fatter ass. They don't want that BBL. Trying to get some yams. They're trying to stimulate more growth effectively. You probably encounter some of these people by doing endless plyometric drills and box jumps, not realizing this training will not cause much glute hypertrophy. It's not enough to simply use the muscle you want to grow. The training stimulus must be specific to the desired outcome, hypertrophy as well. Thankfully, the subsequent chapters of this book will help you avoid missing this training specificity mark. For now, let's go over writing a needs analysis for hypertrophy training in more detail. Step 1. First, what is needed to perform in a sport or pursuit must be assessed. In the case of training for physique development, this will differ depending on whether the pursuit is for competition or personal hobby. A personal physique pursuit needs analysis might better be described as a wants analysis. It can be more subjective, such as, I want bigger arms. Yeah, I want bigger chests. I want bigger legs. I want that V line. I want that line in my back. I don't want a big back. I want to show my spine. I want to show my back muscles off. A competitor needs, on the other hand, must be more objective, such as, my arms need to be 2 inches larger in circumference to be equivalent to my average competitor in my next bodybuilding competition. That's specific. Another highlight that stood out to me is, competitor or hobbyist, you must identify which muscle groups you need or want to grow during the training program you're preparing to write. While it's easy to say, all of them. All of them. Yeah, I want all of them. I don't know why I sound like that, but yeah, I want all of them. That's basically saying, because the way they wrote it, they put quotations around all of them. I'm assuming that the person's a dumbass. You gotta be specific. So I'm sounding like a dumbass. How I think a dumbass would sound, by saying all of them. And I was that dumbass. I do want all of them. I am that dumbass, in fact, actually. But continuing on, in most cases, especially for advanced lifters, growing all of them efficiently in a single training phase or set of phases is not realistic. Create an ordered priority ranking for body parts. Muscles that are ranked higher on this priority list should usually be trained closer to the beginning of a training session. Be trained with higher total volume per week and with more isolation exercises, among other differences to be extensively explained in the chapter on the overload principle. You might be able to get good results from your program without applying a needs analysis and only checking the very boxes of the specificity principle. But even if it might make gains is satisfactory to you, remember that it might not cut it out for those you help with hypertrophy, including paying clients, especially if you're a coach. Let me read that over. You might be able to get good results from your program without applying a needs analysis and only checking the very basic boxes of the specificity principle. But even if it might make gains is satisfactory to you, remember that it might not cut it for those you help with hypertrophy training, including paying clients if you're a coach, or just trying to help someone out. Another highlight that stood out to me is, without digressing too much into diet details, which can be found in our Renaissance Diet 2.0 book, one of the most important features of a diet that supports muscle growth or maintenance is sufficient protein intake. Around 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. Calorie intake will then dictate whether tissue is lost or gained. If you're trying to conserve muscle while losing fat, a hypocaloric condition is probably mandatory. If you're trying to gain muscle, a calorie surplus is your best bet. Those that are fat phobic sometimes meander between a deficit and a maintenance level of caloric intake, lamenting their disappointing gains year after year, all the while avoiding hypocaloric eating. If you don't know what hypocaloric eating is, look it up. A hypocaloric. If you don't know what that word means, look it up. Hypocaloric. In the most direct way, new muscle is built from new raw materials. Unless you're very new to training or very overfat, eating at a caloric surplus is central to optimal muscle gain. Caloric, I don't know how to pronounce it. But for me, I'm just gonna say caloric. I'm gonna say caloric. Eating at a caloric surplus is central to optimal muscle gain. In the most direct way, new muscle is built from new raw materials. Unless you're very new to training or very over fat, that's a nice way of saying obese or just a fat ass, eating at a caloric surplus is central to optimal muscle gain. I'm just reading from the book. I'm not trying to hurt any feelings here. Another thing that stood out to me is when people first begin their muscle growth journeys, they are often bombarded with programs and advice they hardly know what to do with. Some programs write the perception of being hardcore to earn popularity. By virtue of this reputation and some noob gains results, such programs continue to be recommended and performed in vast excess to their actual effectiveness. The quintessential example of this type of program is the squats and milk approach, which recommends you drink milk up to a gallon a day and do lots of squats. I thought that was funny, that's why I highlighted this section. Noob gains, I like that word. Yeah, the old school, drinking lots of milk and doing lots of squats. That's old school. Another thing that stood out to me is the more general example of this under-application of specificity is when people train with training partners and just do what their partner does, or what a non-customized app tells them, or follow a program from social media not designed for them. Either way, the person is not getting the kind of workout that is tailored to their needs. That's italicized. Their needs. And perhaps not even efficiently to hypertrophy needs. That goes back to that drinking a gallon of milk a day. Oh my goodness, RIP to the toilet. That doesn't even sound right. I don't even drink milk like that. I drink almond milk. Drinking 1% of milk a day. Sheesh. Anyways, to get one of those, you have to do a needs analysis. Decide what muscle groups you want to grow, again, and which of those you want to prioritize, and then design a program to achieve those exact goals. Another section that I highlighted was the over-application of specificity. The muscles of advanced physique athletes are often so large and require such high volumes of weight training to grow that training part of the body hard often means having to back off all the other parts. The ultimate and most extreme examples of this are when bodybuilders will stop training a body part altogether so that recovery ability is freed up for the remaining prioritized parts to be trained that much harder and grown that much more. Branch Warren, owner of the most developed and genetically gifted pairs of legs in the history of physique sport, has gone without training his legs for up to an entire year at a time so that his relatively smaller upper body could catch up to some extent. This course of action was very effective, and because of years of training history and amazing genetics, Branch was able to bring his legs back within weeks of training them again. This very specific training plan was needed in his case. If you're a beginner, however, your muscles are almost certainly not big enough to warrant putting whole muscle groups on hold for a year during a hypertrophy cycle. Go look up this guy if you want to know how big his legs are. Branch Warren on Instagram or Google. Smaller muscles do not demand a whole lot of body's systemic recovery resources, and so training them all in the same program is likely possible for quite a long time. Thus, for beginners, excessive prioritization of muscle training volumes is often necessary. Another section that stood out to me in this chapter is the repetitive movement injury risks exist. I'm going to repeat that. Repetitive movement injury risks exist. Doing all of your training for a given muscle group with just one or two exercises indefinitely can lead to a higher chance of wear and tear injuries. You're exposing connective tissue to the same stress patterns all the time, risking chronic irritation. Another section. In very imaginative linear thinking, if you want to grow a muscle, you train it with the exact exercise that isolates the muscle. This is why those ridiculous universal exercise machines from decades ago nearly all have the leg curl and leg extension module. Because how would you train legs other than to literally flex and extend the knee through resistance? The answer to that question is that you could do it through a myriad of ways, the best of which, for many reasons, are compound movements. If you do squats, not only do you train your quads, but you train your glutes, your adductors, and your spinal erectors too. I'm gonna repeat that again. Let's start here. Excessive use of isolation. In very unimaginative linear thinking, if you want to grow a muscle, you train it with the exact exercise that isolates the muscle. This is why those ridiculous universal exercise machines from decades ago nearly all have the leg curl and leg extension module. Because how would you train legs other than to literally flex and extend the knee through resistance? The answer to that question is that you could do it through a myriad of ways, the best of which, for many reasons, are compound movements. If you do squats, I'm gonna repeat that. If you do squats, not only do you train your quads, but you train your glutes, your adductors, and your spinal erectors too. Because you can safely use more weight. The forces you can generate in compound movements, even when measured at the muscle level itself, are often higher with compounds than they are with isolation movements. So the squats are higher with compounds than they are with isolation movements like the leg curl and leg extension module. For anyone who is fairly well trained, the realization that compounds usually tax the muscle much more than isolations can seem painfully obvious, but it's worth noting. What you can get from compound movements is greater overall stimulus, and in fewer sets than with isolations. After all, even if leg extensions and squats stimulated the quads equally set for set, which they don't, you'd have to do glute kicks, adductor work, lower back work, and some hamstring work to get all the stimulus you get from just a few sets of squats. I'm gonna just leave it at that. And then to sum it up, in that case, something like leg curls becomes a good choice to add hamstring volume with continuing to tax the other already fatigued muscles. Isolations, just like compounds, have their advantages and disadvantages, and we'll explore those in depth in later chapters. For now, suffice it to say that we should consider both as potential tools in a program designed to support specific goals based on a needs analysis, rather than favoring one over another as a matter of course. In summary, once again, writing a needs analysis involves the following steps: determining the general qualities needed for the target sport or pursuit, determining individual strengths and weaknesses in the context of the sport or pursuit. I'm going to repeat that again. Writing a needs analysis involves the following steps: determining the general qualities needed for the target sport or pursuit, and also determining individual strengths and weaknesses in the context of the sport or pursuit. Pursuit meaning like whatever you're trying to achieve, your goal. The principle of specificity directs all of your training efforts and is the single most important of the training principles. If you want or need bigger legs, but you're training only your arms, no other training principle can correct this mistake. what the fuck are you doing? If you're trying to get bigger legs, why are you only training your arms? Come on, let's think, guys.